And welcome to this week's Practice as Research seminar. I'm really excited to have with us Professor Ananda Breed, who is going to be talking today about exploring local cultural forms, engaging stakeholders and informing policy and research and curriculum through arts-based research methods. And she's going to do that, not just, as in terms of talking about that, but actually also talking about how to do that at scale, which is something that's particularly interesting, because creative methods often people associate with small things, whereas Ananda is going to be talking about big things. So it's quite exciting to have that opportunity today. Ananda Breed is Professor of Theatre and Principal Investigator of the AHRC GCRF Network Plus project, Mobile Arts for Peace, informing the national curriculum and youth policy for peace building in Kyrgyzstan, Rwanda, Indonesia, and Nepal from 2020 to 2024. And the Newton Fund project, Mobile Arts for Peace at Home, which is an online psychosocial support through the arts in Rwanda. Breed is the author of Performing the Nation, Genocide, Justice and Reconciliation in Seagull Books Publishing. And she's the co-editor of Performance and Civic Engagement with Palgrave Macmillan. She's also the co-editor of Creating Culture in Post-Socialist Central Asia, also with Palgrave, and the co-editor of the Routledge Companion to Applied Performance, also obviously with Routledge. The former research fellow of the International Research Center Interweaving Performance Cultures at the Vrije Universiteit from 2013 to 2014. I'm really excited to have you here, Ananda. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Please do share your screen, and how we're going to do this is we're going to give you your 20-30 minutes time to do your presentation first, and then there'll be a conversation with all of us. So anyone who's here, please make sure that you're engaging with us. It's always exciting for speakers to hear other voices, not just mine. So with no further ado, Ananda, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for being here today. You're on mute.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for inviting me, and thank you for all of you for your attendance. Just to note that the focus of MAP is dialogue. So although I'll be presenting Mobile Arts for Peace and exploring how cultural forms have been used to engage stakeholders and to inform policy and curriculum through arts-based methods, I would really appreciate if there are any comments, questions, reflections in the chat. And also if you can contribute your own ideas, your own projects, so that it's kind of a sharing between all of us as I deliver this presentation. So again, thank you very much, Nicole, for the introduction. I'm at the University of Lincoln, but I'm working with over 12 partnering organizations. And so it's a very large project. It was funded £2 million in 2020 to serve as almost like an umbrella funding project with the aims of first contributing to the role of arts-based approaches to inform curriculum and policy, but also to have further understanding of how one might navigate varied systems and stakeholders from the local to national level. In my presentation today, I'm going to provide an overview of MAP, and then I'm going to give some case studies. And just to state a big thank you to our co-investigators from each of the 4 countries who have contributed the materials for today's presentation as well. And then I'll close with some of our findings and invite you to our upcoming MAP conference, which is from the 22nd through the 26th of May. It will be in person here at the University of Lincoln, and it'll also be online. So hopefully you can continue to engage with MAP in that way. So in terms of the aims and objectives of MAP, we found that there was a real gap in terms of the contribution of children and young people to peace-building processes. Although they're incredibly active at local to national levels, that was not really visible. And it was not clear how children and young people were actively engaging within peace-building systems in each country. So we wanted to explore how influencing curricula and policy might be enacted to address global challenges, and also to primarily create modes of communication between youth and policymakers from the local to the global. What was really clear is that children and young people did not feel heard or listened to, and did not feel that they had a platform to express themselves. So we really aimed to create a two-way form of communication between children and young people, primarily using arts-based approaches to serve as that platform, but also exploring cultural nuances in terms of trying to adapt local cultural forms for dialogic purposes. In terms of the MAP milestones or journey, we started with our baseline in 2019. So we were funded through AHRC with a development award prior to the funding of our large Network Plus project to initially co-produce the project with our stakeholders, which was extremely valuable. So we worked with our stakeholders across the 4 countries to understand what the needs might be. MAP is always aiming to be of service and to address a need and an invitation from our in-country partners. So in that first year, we conducted baseline research in terms of the needs within the communities that we were serving, and also to start developing a methodology. So we worked with children and young people, educators, artists, decision makers, civil society workers, to first explore how local cultural forms might be adapted for dialogic purposes. This went into the development of a MAP manual, and that MAP manual was then translated across 5 languages. We created the MAP website, which also has translation functions across the languages which we're working in the 4 countries. And in each of the 4 countries, there were phase 1 activities, which included scoping workshops, training of trainers, working alongside youth researchers to create MAP researcher clubs in schools in each of the 4 countries. And then once we had kind of a baseline in terms of trying to understand what the needs were, what type of cultural forms we'd be using, what tools we'd be using, had the kind of capacity building across the 4 countries, global south to global north to global south, cross, global south to global south. We then initiated the launch of small grant projects. So we funded 32 youth-led small grant projects, each of about £5,000, so with a total of about £160,000. And those youth-led small grant projects were really informative in terms of having the young people be able to work in a kind of peer-to-peer way within their communities to collect data, to code data, analyze data, and disseminate through arts-based forms. And that was ranging from the use of comics to performance, visual arts, dance, drama, and drumming, as well as film, just to name a few of the cultural forms that were used. And then based on those findings and those outputs, we then launched 8 medium grant projects. So there was a funding call of £50,000 each, with a total of £400,000 that was funded for principal investigators across the 4 countries, including the UK, to lead on medium grant projects, which built on phase 1 findings, as well as the youth-led small grant projects, to really explore the two-way form of communication that I've described, and engaging children and young people in dialogue with decision makers and policymakers. There's been numerous webinars since the beginning of the project, as well as capacity building workshops and arts-based methods, safeguarding, and ethics. We've engaged University of Northampton in terms of exploring the social impact of the project from the very beginning. We've conducted an international conference here at University of Lincoln, which engaged our co-Is and youth participants. And then we launched 2 monitoring, evaluation, and learning projects, in which we funded each of those projects £100,000 to work alongside our youth researchers to create bespoke arts-based tools that would be used in the monitoring, evaluation, and learning across the project. So really making sure that the project was accountable to the young people who we were serving. So that gives a little bit of an overview of MAP. To note that since its inception, we've served over 28,000 participants, and we also were funded with another project called MAP at Home Online Psychosocial Support through the Arts in Rwanda. And that project was initiated during the time of the pandemic, and we were using online platforms such as Zoom and arts practices to link mental health service users with mental health service providers, primarily working with young mothers, former drug users, and also street-connected young people. So to date, we've worked with over 194 partner organizations, delivered over 828 engagement activities, and produced over 279 artistic outputs. So again, just noting kind of the breadth, depth, range of outputs that have been developed, and that's something that we're continuing to think through, especially since the funding for MAP ends in July of this year, trying to make sure that we continue to engage both our stakeholders, but also the larger research community in terms of how we can learn from these resources. So now I'm going to give you a couple of examples, but perhaps before I do, Nicole, do you think I should take questions as I go or comments as I go, or should I just launch?
That's entirely up to you. I mean, we can always, you know, sort of interrupt briefly and check with people if there are any questions. I don't see any hands up, so it looks like people are kind of okay. Oh, there is one question. Please come on in.
Sorry,
Hi,
I was furiously typing in the chat. I was interested in what you were talking about when you were talking about the monitoring and evaluation process and how you incorporated arts-based methods into that process. I'd be interested to hear what types of methods, and you're probably going to go into this later, I assume, but I was interested in hearing more about what those methods were, how they ended up manifesting, and were they co-curated, for example, co-created with the young people, to what extent, and how did that happen? And then my final sort of thought was around the effectiveness of that methods and in comparison to more traditional social science methods. I am an advocate for arts-based methods, so I'm really excited by this sort of project more broadly, but also just my specialism is in method monitoring and evaluation, so that's why I'm interested.
Yeah, brilliant. Great. Thank you for that question. So we wanted to initially design the MEL framework based on some of the methods that our in-country teams were already engaging with. So we're working with very seasoned researchers, NGO workers, IO workers. And so a lot of our lead partnering organizations already had a toolbox of methods that they were using. So some of those did include more traditional methods in terms of like interviews, focus groups, surveys, and what have you. But then in terms of the arts-based methods, what we were really interested in would be how different types of activities that we use in MAP can be adapted to serve as a MEL tool, for example, such as we have an exercise called the Wellbeing Barometer, where a lot of you will be familiar with kind of stand on the line of 1 to 10. You know, how might you respond to this exercise in terms of well-being? And so someone might stand on a 10. I felt open, blah, 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 blah. I felt connected to others. 1, I felt really excluded. I couldn't engage with that exercise at all. So we use things like that. We used visual aids, visual well-being barometers. People adapted it in different ways, like a flower, like literally a medical instrument, like a thermometer. So there was that kind of measurement, which of course is quantitative, but doing it in much more of an embodied way, a visual way. A lot of you will also be familiar probably with River Journey, in which individuals will illustrate the journey of map, but through the idea or kind of the symbol of a river, and be able to draw, scribe, write words, draw images of different things that were happening within map and how they're impacted by it within that river journey. And then we also, as an example, it's a bit of impact, but also, Mel, we had a week-long impact week where we invited individuals to share a song, a poem, a painting of significant change. So of course, with Mel, the idea of significant change is quite useful in terms of getting those case studies in relationship to people's individual experiences in MAP. And so we had submissions and selected 10 from each country to be able to share online through a webinar across the week their individual significant change as articulated through a cultural form, or as articulated through a cultural an artistic narration. So often that was a drawing, a comic, films, a song, poetry, a story. So those are just some examples, but we have a whole map toolkit that was created, which I believe is online on our map website. You can find some of our resources, and there's a section on our map website that gives more detail about our monitoring, evaluation, learning framework and materials and resources that have been created as a part of that.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. That was great.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for that question. And please put in the link any resources that you might have to share as well from your own research and practice. That would be really valuable. Thank you. So there were 4 case studies that I had provided in the summary of the talk today. And one of them is Gira Ngoma, or One Drum Per Girl, led by Kiki, who leads the Women Cultural Center in Rwanda. We thought this project was super exciting because basically there's a new gender policy in Rwanda. However, Kiki, as an artist, has been trying for over 20 years to have her drumming organization or company kind of noticed or made visible on kind of the national frame, and is consistently being told how Kiki's work is great. Why doesn't she put up a performance? But really, she hasn't been able to have the drumming organization that she has acknowledged or funded nationally, although there's quite a lot of international recognition of this work. So her project was about reconstructing culture. So how can we use drumming to reconsider gender equality, to literally perform gender equality through the Girls Drumming Project? And in this way, Kiki was aiming to make sure that the framework for music, dance, and drama in Rwanda is gender responsive. So currently, it is mandated that the subject of music, dance, and drama should be taught in schools. There's a time within everyone's schedule per week to teach this subject, but largely it is not being taught. And teachers have said this is because they don't have the resources. They don't have the training for this subject. And also, the subject of arts is a little bit taboo in Rwanda, and there's a bit of stigma in terms of the value of arts. So often the subject will be replaced with the sciences or maths or what have you. And so Kiki was aiming to transform arts of exclusion, so in this way, primarily boys and men being allowed to drum, to the arts of inclusion. So she worked with over 275 girls across 11 schools in the rural area of Huye in Rwanda to train girls in a range of traditional drumming and dance techniques. And some of these would be seen as fairly taboo for girls to be, as an example, performing the Ntore warrior dance or to reciting the warrior poetry. So Kiki and her team received comments like, how can these girls be reciting warrior poetry, which is reciting big deeds? These girls don't have those kind of stories, and women don't have these kind of stories. And so that just illustrates some of the bias with culturally, which Kiki was trying to address with her project. So the training includes drumming and Ntore war dance, songs, poetry, and juggling. And she staged 4 festivals in Huye in big auditoriums, invited parents, community members, schools, decision makers to attend these events. We shared some of the videos from these events, and we can drop some of the links to these really powerful videos into the chat as well. But as an example, when we shared some of these links with UNESCO Rwanda, the response was, the only thing wrong with that video is it doesn't have our logo on it. You know, there was a real strong uptake just from that 2-minute video of how powerful this work is, especially in terms of gender equality. So her team involves 12 drummers who she's worked with over 20 years, who serve to train 11 teachers in the 11 schools to make it sustainable in terms of ongoing training, delivering over 64 workshops. And in this way, Kiki's really trying to seek how to make the project sustainable by training the teachers, by engaging the heads of schools, and thus there's this overlap between kind of the in-school and the formal and the out-of-school, which is when a lot of the workshops are held. So trying to blend the formal and the non-formal or informal. And then, as I had noted at the beginning of our talk, that each of the projects have different kind of policy roundtables, engaging with local to national officials in terms of informing policy with policy briefs, with performances which communicate the issues and needs of the children and young people involved in the MAP project as well. Any questions about that project before I go on to the next case study? Okay, so the next project is called The Magic of Theater, partnering organization Josh Kubat, led by Nurlan Asenbekov. As Nurlan is a very established theater director in Kyrgyzstan, and a part of his past work has been about using local cultural forms to create a ethnographic theater, he called it. So really trying to explore local epic stories, which are improvisational, to address some of the current issues in society. So some of you may be familiar with Manas. Manas, it's a very large epic, larger than the Mahabharata, Iliad and Odyssey. It's a current art form, so it's not like you would sit down and read a book about it. It's actually an improvisatory form that's used at most celebratory events, national and local level. And so he was really interested in exploring how theater could be used for dialogue. But it's based on a very strong tradition of improvisation within the country itself. And so he was trying to work with a local school that aims to serve marginalized and underserved youth populations, primarily migrant youth. So in Kyrgyzstan, one of the issues that children and young people had noted was that parents often will go to Russia or neighboring countries to make a living and bring back money into the family, but often they'll be gone for years, and children are often left with grandparents or other community members. And this was a big issue that a lot of young people noted in the research in Rwanda. So what I think has been very powerful in terms of magic of theater is that because of Nurlan's long-standing work in theater, and because of the community-engaged element of this project, it's brought in the Ministry of Education, who is trying to work with Nurlan to develop kind of a national arts framework, which would be very new to Kyrgyzstan in terms of a contribution of MAP to national curriculum. There's a couple of films that I don't think we'll have time to share, but just to note that we do have another project in Kyrgyzstan led by our partner organization, Foundation for Tolerance International. And as an example, one of the issues that was being explored by children and young people in that project was girls' access to education, that as is unfortunately the case in many areas, that girls are often not supported to continue, especially secondary education. And there was a performance that involved an adolescent who had that story. And when her story was performed, her mother was in the audience. It was attended by local decision makers, by parents, by policymakers. And there was such a strong emotive response to that film. The mother had said, you know, I didn't really realize, you know, how much this has affected you. This is just the experience I had growing up. I really hadn't thought of changing that pattern. And there's been a really strong platform for dialogue in terms of girls' access to education in that project. Another example is Deuda and Mithala Arts. So we were working with UCA and partnering organizations in Nepal to explore how Deuda and Mithala Arts can aim to develop knowledge production in relationship to primarily marginalized communities and marginalized regions in Nepal. So as in Nepal, there's a launch of an arts education framework, we are really interested in working with our partners to explore how our MAP participants could inform the local curriculum, which would then inform the national arts education framework. And so one of the cultural forms that we're using is Deuda. And Deuda is from the far western region of Nepal. When we had a joint policy roundtable with UNESCO Nepal, one of our MAP co-investigators who is from that particular region and is an expert on Deuda had stated that it was the first time that Deuda had been presented on that kind of national stage, and how important it is for representation in research, in education, and how important that is in terms of peace-building strategies as well. So in terms of the use of cultural forms, we were looking for forms that naturally created dialogue. So Deuda is kind of a call, response, song and dance, in which our participants could infuse Deuda with lyrics that relate to current issues and problems that the children and young people face. So it's that, again, that sense of improvisation, adaptation of local cultural forms for dialogic purposes. In this way, ensuring that Deuda has a platform and through that platform has representation. And I think there's something quite interesting about how the cultural forms evoke a particular history, evoke a particular kind of knowledge base, and enables a lot of the participants to be the experts on that form, but also how they want to express issues through that form. So it's not trying to turn kind of those policy platforms into kind of policy speak to try to speak to the decision makers, but really inviting decision makers to engage in dialogue through the cultural form itself. Another example is Mithala Arts. So what we found really interesting about the use of this particular art form is Mithala Arts is primarily used by girls and women. It's been passed down through generations. Mithala Arts are used to create murals in homes, around entranceways, along alleyways. So it's a very public, visible, visual art form. And again, we found it really interesting that was primarily passed on between girls and women. So we are currently working with JWAS and Kathmandu University to develop a local curriculum in terms of Mithala Arts. So another opportunity that we have in Nepal is that nationally, the development of curriculum has been devolved to the local level, but a lot of teachers have noted that there's not enough training and or time to create their own curriculum. So we've been working alongside child clubs. Again, child clubs were mandated to be used to have children and young people be in dialogue with decision makers, but a lot of the child clubs are defunct. We used the child clubs, reignited the child clubs as well for that purpose, and we've been working with local artists and partners to create a local curriculum that it will then be used at the local level, but also inform the arts education framework at a national level. Are there any questions about any of that so far, or any of your own experiences or projects that you want to share that might relate or resonate with anything that's been said so far? Okay. And Nicole, just feel free if there are things in chat, because I'm not following chat. Feel free to unmute and shout things out if needed.
Yes, thank you. So there is a comment in the chat box just now, and Ranjita's raised her hand as well. I think it's probably just easier to just bring Ranjita in at this stage. Ranjita.
Hello, Ananda. Hi, Nicole. Sorry you can't see me. I'm just having my lunch, and
No
but
worries.
the camera will come on shortly. But no, just to say thank you very much. I'm originally from Nepal, and I'm doing research applying the arts and creative approaches, looking at alcohol problems, but so early identification in pattern. So you
Okay.
probably know, and so we have researchers in Nepal as well as in the UK, and really enjoying looking at your work. But the work I'm doing is sort of capacity building, sort of developing sort of research methodologies that's sort of inherent and culturally, contextually sort of appropriate and sensitive, and we're kind of co-creating those approaches. So it's all been learning on both sides. And really looking forward to connecting. And I really would like to learn more about the arts education framework in Nepal and what's going on, because this is public health, but I'm very keen to see that's embedded, in sort of looking at sort of training and education of health and social care practitioners, as well as in sort of school level and things like that. So thank you so much. So I will just let you continue with your talk, but I just wanted to say hi.
Brilliant, Ranjita. Thank you so much. And just to note, at the end of the talk, I'll be sharing a link to the MAP conference. People can join online or in person. People are very welcome to attend either way. But we will have panels that speak to primary SDGs that we're aiming to address through MAP, including SDG 4, quality education. And we have some of our co-investigators and partnering organizations delivering presentations that give deeper knowledge and understanding of those case studies and how they're aiming to address the arts education framework. So hopefully you can attend that event. I think you'll find some nice connections and synergies there. Thank you. So in terms of our next case study, which is beyond tradition or revitalizing Lenong, this project is led by Atmajaya Catholic University and PCC, led by Indra Nirpatria and Benglan Turn. And in this project, they're really aiming to adapt Lenong, which is a folk theater that combines opera, martial arts, and participatory theater to engage children and young people in communicating issues and needs, but also to try to promote the heritage of the Betawi ethnic group in Jakarta, which is a marginalized kind of ethnic group. And so it was quite important in this project to really explore and highlight the contributions of Betawi arts. In all of the projects, there's that exploration of the cultural form, adaptation of the cultural form. And in this case, the participants were really interested in using film with Lenong. Lenong is primarily a live performing arts form, but the children and young people adapted it to be used with film, and also to create an interactive performance that was staged online with decision makers and representatives from the ministries. So again, there's that idea of adaptation of the form for dialogic purposes, but there's also an adaptation in terms of how to use that form by children and young people in a way that feels accessible to them and feels like a way that they want to express needs and issues and create those platforms. So they're working on creating a training manual and also implementing the module with the Education Office and Cultural Office of Jakarta. Just to note, in general, we've been working with a youth advisory board across the whole of the project. So we have youth advisory board members who have advised on the design and delivery of the project from inception, but also they've been integral in terms of the implementation of our monitoring, evaluation, and learning strategy and collecting data for MEL. Our last example is Gen Peace, led by King's College London, and Save the Children, led by Sukanya Poder and Rindi Donata. It looks like the slide that I was going to share has changed format for some reason. There we go. So this just gives you an illustration of how participants moved through the project, and in many ways can be used as an example of all the projects in terms of the different stages of co-production and implementation, engaging our stakeholders. Another example in terms of issues raised by children and young people and recommendations that have been requested or communicated to decision makers and policymakers as well. And again, it's one example, but across all projects, there's been the development of policy briefs, and there's been policy roundtables to communicate those issues and needs and recommendations. And again, just an example of a national level development planning meeting in which the methodology of MAP and Gen Peace is being used to inform how government engages children and young people in national level decision-making events and the national youth summits. So to close, just to note how we've been embedding MAP into HEIs through the development of continuing professional development programs. We've been creating MAP child clubs and researcher clubs to engage youth researchers. We've been working with cultural artists to develop resources that can guide and inform the way arts-based platforms might be used for national structures in national child forums, and as an example, working alongside Ministry of Education and otherwise. We've been working to inform policy in terms of gathering evidence-based data, in terms of the power of arts-based approaches, working with lived experience, creating policy briefs, conducting policy roundtables, and engaging local to national decision makers in terms of creating platforms for communication between children, young people, and policymakers. Just to note, some of the challenges have been the bias that I had noted in terms of an appreciation for arts-based approaches, that there's this sweet spot between formal and non-formal modes of communication and structures, and that we've been trying to embed methods at a local level while we're also aiming to inform national to international structures. Right now, we're working with UNESCO to inform the Culture and Arts Education Framework, which is an international framework, which started by working with MAP Nepal on its arts education framework. And also continuing to work with our Youth Advisory Board in implementing MEL, but also continuing to support them in terms of some of the initiatives that they will have as MAP continues to grow and change. So just a big thanks to Nicole and all of our supporters and partners. And in terms of ways to connect, please go to our website, map.lincoln.ac.uk, sign up to our newsletter, check out our blogs. And again, we'll put a link to our conference. And we'd love for you to engage in our conference as well. So huge thank you to all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ananda, for this fabulous presentation, which was more interactive anyway, because you stopped and answered questions halfway through as well. So that's great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Obviously, there's a virtual round of applause for you right now. Unfortunately, we can't hear that, but it is there. I don't know whether there are any further questions from other people. You know, this is the space, sort of the last sort of 5-10 minutes to go through. But can I also point out there have been some comments and links in the chat. I will make those also available with the recording on the website, so that you know that's kind of together with the conversations that we're having here.
Great.
Also, I mean, I'm interested, if nobody else is asking any questions, I'm going to kick this off, Ananda. I'm interested, you know, a lot of the times when people are saying to me, you know, how do you engage people with creative methods? How do you engage participants with creative methods? And are there some creative methods that are better than others for particular groups of participants? I always say that I don't think it matters. I think all methods work for everybody. But you've obviously done this across different countries. You know, is there something that you need to translate certain methods? Is there such a thing? Or, for example, would you be able to do that drumming workshop with any group of girls anywhere around the world? You know, that's kind of, do we have to translate the methods or do we not? What is your experience with that?
Yeah, I think for us, it's had to deal with intention. So the intention throughout MAP is adaptation. The intention has been making things local, naming and renaming terms as well. So that's been really, really important. Is at the very start of our workshops and our project, there's that kind of decolonial, one might say decolonial approach in terms of thinking through, you know, what are the terms we're using? What would other terms be? How would you position the project? So that's been really important. And then it's been, you know, trying to explore the cultural form itself. So sometimes I think arts can be used as like, here's a tool, here's a game, here's an activity, but without really exploring what's embedded in the form itself. So what is the history of that form? What knowledge and narratives does it contain? So understanding that it's, you know, it's not neutral. Cultural forms aren't neutral. The art form itself isn't neutral. So we've had to kind of play with that in terms of exploring that. And I think it's interesting that in Kyrgyzstan, although as an example, Nurlan has an amazing wealth of and background in the use of local kind of indigenous approaches to performance making, a lot of his performances, he chose to use kind of Western texts.
Yes.
Which I was like, what are you doing? You know, that's not why we funded you. But I think it's really interesting that sometimes you actually want to use something on the outside to view inside in a different way, or approach some things from a different way, or and to have that space of dialogue with that gap between kind of cultural forms. And knowledge of those cultural forms, which is interesting. So sometimes you might have a rejection of that process, or resistance to a process as well, which is just as important to try to explore and understand. So yeah, I guess in light of your question, I think, especially because we're working with peace building and mental health and well-being, we've really had to co-produce throughout. In terms of the possible sensitivity of personal stories, community stories, and also understand the approach to peace building. So especially in Rwanda, where we have a context of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, which was largely a close genocide, which was very communal, very public. Our co-investigator, Dr. Chastu Ohore, who's also a psychotherapist, psychosocial worker, had stated that the Western approaches just don't work. You know, this one-on-one counseling, that it needs to be communal. It needs to be suffering together, you know, which is a term, kubabarira, suffering together. So again, trying to understand kind of the cultural context, the nuances of then how you use particular forms. Not only the form itself, but in what way. You know, yeah. What is the shape that takes as a workshop or engaging community members or otherwise?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ananda. There's a question. Ranjita, please come in.
Oh, thank you very much, Ananda. I was just going to really support what you said there. In the alcohol work that I'm doing in Kathmandu, a huge shame and stigma to talk, and that sort of one-to-one Western style of consultation really doesn't work. And in fact, you know, it's people are really, you know, people don't want to express or concerns when that sort of offer is presented. So when we've been doing work in Nepal and workshops and with different types of drinkers and non-drinkers, and the community are together, and we present when we do these events with our Nepali researchers. You know, they say, oh, we don't know what to do, and can you help us? And we know that this is what's happening in the community, and what would be needed. So it's that very kind of, because it is in a very exploratory stage of this study at the moment, but that has been really rich. And you know, and then the approaches, and when they've told us what kind of support and how the look and feel of it, you know, what is it? It's so different from the, you know, I'm an addiction specialist pharmacist, in the support and treatment that we have is very different, and that's been very kind of little explored. And therefore the recommendations from the West and the WHO recommendations of how certain things should be really hasn't been unpacked. You know, it's really inappropriate, and it really has to start from zero. You know, this is really, and the work that you're doing really should be informing all of that. So and it's not actually explicitly expressed, and I feel that's the way this kind of work should go in the future. It'd be really important too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ranjita. Thank you. There's a comment. There's a couple of comments in the chat box and the question, a hand up as well. So I'm going to bring Julia in first.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much, Ananda. Really fantastic presentation, and I've had a chance to learn more about your work through Laura Wright, who is a colleague of mine in Arts and Health. Yeah, so thanks very much. Just wanted to state an observation from some recent work that we did in the UK, and see if maybe this resonates with your own experience. We had a project that was, the intention was to bring more young people who don't typically participate in cultural volunteering into cultural institutions in volunteering roles. And we wanted to do that through sort of arts-based activity, but also with an emphasis on supporting well-being well-being, because a lot of the people that we recruited into this project were people with physical or other kinds of disabilities, people who had severe anxiety, who couldn't leave their houses, who really struggled, neurodivergence, a lot of different kinds of conditions. And some of the observations that we made during our work were things like, if young people haven't necessarily been involved in creative activity before, it's very difficult to explain co-creation to them at the beginning because they haven't been asked for their opinions before. They're not really sure what co-creation means. They don't even necessarily have the creative tools and skills to engage in those kinds of processes. And so we had to do a lot of work just with sort of very simple introductory, participatory, non-threatening creative activities, just to sort of break the ice and to build trust with the facilitators of the project, so that then they were more prepared and had sort of more capacity to engage in developing the project further. The other thing that we found too was that it's not always you don't always want to sort of advertise well-being as the primary or even secondary objective of the project, or mental health, because, as you say, there's still a lot of stigma or reluctance, or, what are you asking me, kind of at the beginning of things, and that those mechanisms of well-being support, they happen, but they happen in sort of implicit ways as opposed to explicit ways. And over time, people then are more able to talk about how their well-being has improved. But we found this to be sort of a challenge in terms of evaluation, right? Because if you want to collect some kind of baseline data, how do you talk to people about where they are when that might not be a good place? And so one of the things that we sort of devised over the course of the project was what we call the participant journey, which turns out to sound a little bit like your river journey, but trying to sort of give them a rubric for capturing where they were in a very non-threatening way at different points in the project. So anyway, just wondering if you have any thoughts about about co-creation or well-being or anything like that.
Yeah, great. I'd love to learn more about your project. There's another project that I'm a part of now that I'm a co-investigator. It just started, called Arts for Us, using arts-based approaches with children and young people to create resources in the UK and create link to service providers. That might be another project of interest to you.
Yeah.
So I do think so much of it is about play and joy, and creating a space that's about self-expression. Where, when you're joyful, when you're playing, when you're adapting in that imaginative, creative space, it's really malleable, and people find ways that they start materializing in space in new ways, and relationships change in that space. It becomes a real alternative space. And that's a lot of the methodology from MAP came from my observation and research of grassroots associations in Rwanda during the time of Gacaca courts in 2004. And it was quite extraordinary in terms of how the arts created a different kind of space for people to reimagine their relationships after genocide. So I think that we can't underestimate the power of arts in terms of the kind of spaces it creates. And the invitation it gives, because I think a lot of people don't want to be stuck in the way we perform ourselves and the way society is being performed. And so I think that invitation to play and reimagine and create, I think people are very hungry for that, actually. But I think there's ways, as you've noted with your own tools, ways that we engage in stories that create connectors. So I'm thinking about MAP exercises. There's less exercises, but different phases of ways we engage with one another and ourselves. And one of the things that MAP exercises do is they connect. They're connectors. So and so first it's that idea of connecting to one another, and finding ways to create that relationality. And then I think in terms of, as an example, with the Map at Home project, which was about psychosocial support during the pandemic, there were a number of exercises we used online. So one of them was drawing an umbrella, and this is an exercise from CHAST, actually. draw an umbrella. You know, here's the umbrella is what protects you. You know, in the rain are the problems. So it's not talking mental health. It's an umbrella in rain, but people naturally start sharing stories of the rain. And then what is keeping them safe? What is enabling them to feel supported? So that's just one example of using, say, an art form where you don't explicitly use terms, but people are sharing, and you as a researcher are obviously collecting that data, and you're being informed in the project by the responses people have. But that's just one small example.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. So we've got one final question. I know I'm quite conscious of the time, but I do want to make sure that that question gets asked. So the question is, what do you think are the limits of these kinds of arts-based practices? They clearly do very well at showing nuance, communicating lived experience. How do you think you might show the value of this alongside more valued methods like quantitative economic measures, for example? So how do you respond to that, Ananda?
Yeah, I mean, I'd very much welcome you to go to our website and to view some of our monitoring, evaluation, and learning reports, which will have the evidence in terms of the quantitative studies, but also have the qualitative alongside. So we really tried to bring the two together within the project, and you'll see a lot of the outputs throughout MAP have aimed to do that as well. In terms of the limits of these kinds of art-based practices, I think some of the limits might be, as an example, in the case of the one drum per girl, you know, we're trying to engage decision makers and policymakers with a form in which Kiki had very clearly been told not to do that, you know, historically. Luckily, there has been a new gender policy, and luckily we have engaged stakeholders, important stakeholders to support Kiki. But there could always be, you know, the danger perhaps of if we didn't do that, if we weren't serving to advocate, if we weren't serving to make sure that our participants and our researchers have kind of safeguarding protocols in place and we have risk registers and everything else, that there could be a potential of that backfiring, right? And for Kiki as an artist to be excluded in her work in Rwanda. So there could be possible risks with some of the work, I'd say. That hasn't been the case with that particular project, but I've given an example of how that could go wrong if a lot of the other safeguarding mechanisms weren't in place. Sorry, Nicole, you're on mute.
Yes, I'm on mute. I've just realized. Thank you very, very much, Ananda. It's fabulous to have had you here today. I'm really, really grateful that you've given your time to the Practice as Research Network. I'm just very quickly sharing the slide with all of the information. For anyone who's in the room, in this Zoom room, I'm also sharing those links in the chat function with you, so you can follow them up from there. I will also make available the links that have been shared today on the website, so please do connect with us. And I would just like to again ask everybody to give a quick round of applause to Ananda, and a massive thank you for your time and for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.